The wind screamed like a banshee across the Dakota plains, the kind of blizzard that didn't just kill, it erased. Abigail Fuller, alone in her sod-roofed cabin, thought she was prepared for anything the unforgiving land could throw at her. She was wrong. For on the storm's deadliest night, it brought not death, but a child. A girl, small and frozen, with eyes that held the ancient silence of the prairie itself. Abigail offered shelter, a simple act of mercy. She couldn't know that this silent child huddled by her hearth was no ordinary foundling, but the hidden daughter of Mato Niyan, the Lakota prophet whose whispers of destiny were already shaking the foundations of the West. The first icy tendrils of the blizzard had slithered over the horizon at dusk, painting the bruised purple sky with an ominous gray. Abigail Fuller, a woman carved from the same resilient, unyielding timber as the cottonwoods that clung to the distant Meager Creek bed, had seen the signs. The nervous dance of the few remaining prairie birds, the unnatural stillness that had preceded the wind's first mournful cry. She knew its language, this unforgiving land. Her small, sturdy cabin, dug partially into the earth for warmth and protection, was as ready as it could be. Firewood was stacked high, the shutters were barred, and a meager stew bubbled on the cast-iron stove, its scent a small pocket of comfort in the growing chaos. Her late husband Thomas had always said she had a sixth sense for the weather. He'd been gone 3 years now, taken by the lung fever that respected neither strength nor spirit. His absence was a hollow ache, most pronounced when storms like this descended, trapping her in a world of wind and memory. The wind rose from a mournful sigh to a shrieking lament, and then to a full-throated roar that seemed to shake the very bones of the earth. Snow, fine and sharp as ground glass, drove horizontally, finding every tiny chink in the cabin walls. Abigail sat by the stove, mending a torn sackcloth by the flickering lamplight, the sound of her needle a tiny rebellion against the storm's fury. Hours passed, each one measured by the increasing ferocity outside. It was a sound that could drive a person mad, a relentless elemental rage, then a different sound, or rather a cessation of a particular rhythm in the storm's cacophony, followed by a dull thud against the cabin's sturdy oak door. Not the demanding knock of a traveler, nor the desperate scrabbling of a panicked animal. Just a heavy, soft impact, almost lost in the blizzard's symphony of destruction. Abigail froze, her needle poised. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Who or what could be out in this? The nearest neighbor was miles away, and no sane person would brave such a tempest. She clutched the heavy iron poker she kept near the stove, her knuckles white. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice barely audible above the wind. Silence, save for the storm. Hesitantly, she moved to the door, pressing her ear against the cold wood. Nothing. Perhaps it was just a drift of snow, heavier than usual, collapsing against the frame, or a branch torn from a hardy, unseen tree. But the thud had felt different, weighted. Taking a deep breath, Abigail unbarred the door. The wind tore at it, wrenching it from her grasp and slamming it inward with a deafening crack. Snow billowed into the small room, instantly chilling the warm air. And there, slumped against the doorframe, half buried in a fresh drift, was a small, dark shape. For a moment, Abigail thought it was a young animal, a coyote or a deer, overcome by the elements. Then the shape moved, a tiny, shuddering motion, and a patch of dark hair was visible as the wind whipped away a covering of snow. A child. "Good heavens," Abigail gasped, forgetting the cold, forgetting her fear. She plunged forward, battling the wind to reach the small figure. It was a girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, clad in what looked like finely tanned deerskin, now stiff with ice. Her face, peeking from a fur-lined hood, was ashen, her lips blue. Abigail's hands raw from work and cold, fumbled to find a pulse at the child's neck. It was faint, thready, but there. With a surge of adrenaline, she scooped the girl into her arms. She was lighter than Abigail expected, a fragile weight against her chest. Straining against the relentless wind, Abigail managed to haul the child inside and shoulder the door shut, barring it once more against the howling fury. She laid the girl gently on the worn rug before the stove, the warmest spot in the cabin. The child's eyes were closed, her small face a mask of frozen stillness. Her black hair, damp and clinging to her temples, framed delicate features. Around her neck, on a thin leather thong, rested a small, intricately carved wooden bird, clutched tightly in one small, frost-nipped hand. Abigail worked quickly, her earlier anxieties replaced by a fierce protective urgency. She stripped off the girl's frozen outer garments, her fingers shocked by the icy chill of the deerskin. Beneath, the child wore softer, embroidered leggings and a tunic surprisingly dry in places. Her limbs were like ice. Abigail chafed the girl's hands and feet, wrapped her in a thick wool blanket, and propped her near the warmth of the stove. She brewed a weak, sweet tea, hoping to get some warm liquid into her. Hours passed in a blur of anxious care. Slowly, agonizingly, a touch of color returned to the child's cheeks. Her breathing, shallow at first, deepened. Then her eyelids fluttered. Dark, almond-shaped eyes opened not with fear, but with a profound, unnerving stillness. They were ancient eyes, old beyond her years, and they fixed on Abigail with an unwavering, silent intensity. "You're safe now, child," Abigail murmured, offering a tentative smile. "The storm, it's a terrible one. You were lucky I found you." The girl just stared, her expression unreadable. She didn't cry, didn't shiver, didn't make a sound. Her gaze was so direct, so penetrating, it made Abigail feel strangely exposed. "Can you tell me your name?" Abigail asked gently. "Where are you from?" Only silence answered her. The girl's dark eyes, like polished obsidian, seemed to absorb Abigail's words without yielding any response. She didn't even blink. Abigail tried again, speaking slowly, offering a cup of the warm tea. The girl's eyes flickered to the cup, then back to Abigail's face, but she made no move to take it. Her lips remained sealed. The silence stretched, broken only by the dying moans of the blizzard outside and the crackle of the fire. It wasn't the silence of incomprehension, Abigail thought, nor the silence of terror that rendered one mute. It was something else, something deeper, more deliberate, as if the child carried the vast, silent expanse of the snow-choked prairie within her. Abigail, a woman accustomed to solitude, found herself unnerved by this small, silent presence. She had faced down blizzards, droughts, and the profound loneliness of the plains, but the unwavering gaze of this child and the impenetrable silence that surrounded her felt like a new kind of wilderness, one she wasn't sure how to navigate. In her eyes, Abigail saw not just the trauma of the storm, but a story ancient and profound, waiting to be understood, or perhaps one that was never meant to be told. The blizzard raged for 2 more days, imprisoning Abigail and the silent girl in the small cabin. The wind eventually softened its howl to a mournful moan, and the snow, which had fallen in a relentless, blinding curtain, finally ceased. When Abigail cautiously unbarred the door on the third morning, the world outside was a transformed landscape, a vast undulating canvas of white pristine and deadly, the sun glittering on its surface with cold indifference. The girl whom Abigail had taken to calling Wichapi in her mind after the Lakota word for star she'd once heard a trader mention remained a silent enigma. She ate what Abigail offered, small portions of stew, pieces of dried jerky, sips of sweetened tea, but only when Abigail gently coaxed her, sometimes leaving the food beside her and returning later to find it gone. She would sit for hours on the rug by the stove, her small hands folded in her lap, those dark, watchful eyes following Abigail's every move. She never spoke, never uttered a sound, not even a sigh or a whimper. Her silence was absolute, a heavy blanket in the small cabin. Yet Wichapi was not unresponsive. Abigail noticed that her gaze would linger on the small carved bird around her neck, her fingers tracing its shape as if drawing comfort from its familiar form. When Abigail hummed old lullabies, a habit from a lifelong past, she thought she saw a flicker of something in the child's eyes, a distant sorrow perhaps, or a fleeting memory. Slowly, a fragile routine developed. Abigail would do her chores, tending the fire, melting snow, for water, preparing their meager meals, and Wichapi would watch. Then one morning, as Abigail was kneading dough for flatbread, a small brown hand reached out and tentatively touched the flour-dusted board. Abigail paused, surprised. She looked at Wichapi, whose eyes were fixed on the dough. Abigail gently took the girl's hand and showed her how to press it into the soft mixture, leaving a small imprint. A ghost of a smile so faint, Abigail almost missed it, touched Wichapi's lips before vanishing. From then on, the girl began to help in small ways. She would gather kindling from the woodpile, carefully arrange Abigail's mending basket, or wipe down the small wooden table with a damp cloth. Her movements were graceful and efficient, her small face serious with concentration. A bond unspoken, yet palpable, began to weave itself between the solitary woman and the silent child. Abigail found herself talking to Wichapi, narrating her day, sharing memories of Thomas, describing the changing light on the snow-covered plains. She didn't expect a response, but the act of speaking into the silence, of having this small, attentive presence near, eased a loneliness she hadn't fully acknowledged. About a week after the storm, when the drifts had hardened enough to allow for cautious travel, their fragile peace was disturbed. Abigail was outside clearing a path to the lean-to where she kept her few remaining chickens when she saw a figure on horseback approaching in the distance. It was Jedediah Smith, a grizzled old trapper, who occasionally passed by trading pelts for supplies. He was a harmless sort, if a bit too fond of gossip. As Jedediah drew closer, Abigail felt a prickle of unease. She glanced back at the cabin. Wichapi, who had been standing in the doorway, had vanished. "Morning, Abigail," Jedediah called out, his voice raspy. "Thought I'd check if you weathered that monster of a blizzard. Worst I seen in 20 years. He dismounted, his eyes sharp as a hawk's, scanning her homestead. "Heard some unsettling talk in Redemption Gulch." "Unsettling how, Jedediah?" Abigail asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Redemption Gulch was the nearest collection of ramshackle buildings that passed for a town a good half-day's ride away. "Well," he lowered his voice, leaning conspiratorially, "word is some Lakota are restless up north near the Pahasapa, talking about a prophet, Mato Niyan they call him, stirring up trouble, they say, and there's a rumor his kin went missing in the big storm." He squinted at her. "You ain't seen anything unusual out this way, have you? Any stray Injuns? Abigail's heart thumped. She forced a calm expression. Just the snow, Jedediah, and plenty of it. Kept me snowed in tighter than a tick. Jedediah grunted, not entirely convinced. Keep your eyes peeled, Abigail. Times are tense. Some folks are saying this prophet's been preaching about reclaiming lost lands, about a sign, and that his missing kin is part of it. There's even talk of a bounty, though no one's clear on who's offering or for what exactly. His gaze flickered towards her cabin again. You sure you're all alone out here? As always, Jedediah, Abigail said, her voice firm. Just me and the ghosts of winters past. He finally seemed to accept her answer, though his eyes still held a speculative glint. After trading a small bag of salt for a couple of freshly laid eggs Abigail had managed to procure from her hardy hens, he mounted his horse. Stay safe, Abigail. These plains, they got ears. With a final, lingering look at her cabin, he rode off his figure, eventually shrinking against the vast white expanse. Abigail watched him go, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She hurried back inside. The cabin was empty. Panic seized her for a moment before she spotted Wichapi. The girl was squeezed into the narrow space beneath Abigail's cot, pressed so tightly against the wall she was almost invisible in the shadows. Her eyes, wide and dark, were fixed on the door, and for the first time Abigail saw raw, undiluted fear in them. Her small body was trembling. Abigail knelt down. He's gone, Wichapi, she said softly. You're safe. The girl didn't move, didn't relax. It took several long minutes of gentle murmuring before she finally uncurled herself and crept out, her gaze still darting towards the door. Abigail reached out and smoothed her hair. Beneath the deerskin tunic, she felt the frantic beating of the child's heart. That night, as Wichapi slept fitfully on her pallet near the stove, Abigail examined the small carved bird the girl always wore. It was fashioned from dark wood, smooth with age and handling. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the lines clean and evocative. On its underside, almost hidden, was a tiny, incised symbol, a circle with a jagged line like a lightning bolt bisecting it. Abigail didn't recognize it, but it felt significant, a deliberate mark. She thought of Jedediah's words, a Lakota prophet, Mato Niyan, missing kin, a sign. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, forming a picture that was both terrifying and profound. This silent child, this star she had sheltered, was more than just a lost girl. She was connected to something larger, something that had already set wary men to whispering and greedy men to offering bounties. And Abigail, by offering her shelter, had unwittingly stepped into the heart of it. The protective warmth she felt for Wichapi now mingled with a chilling apprehension. The vast, silent prairie outside suddenly felt less empty, its snowy expanse now possibly concealing watchers, hunters, or perhaps even a grieving father whose whispers could shake the earth. The encounter with Jedediah Smith left Abigail deeply unsettled. His words about the Lakota prophet Mato Niyan and his missing kin echoed in her mind, overlaying the silent presence of Wichapi with a new and dangerous significance. The bounty he'd mentioned vague, as it was sent a chill down her spine. Someone wanted this child, and likely not for benevolent reasons. A few days later, her supplies dwindling, Abigail knew she could no longer postpone a trip to Redemption Gulch. The thought of leaving Wichapi alone, even for a day, filled her with anxiety, but necessity forced her hand. She tried to explain to the girl using simple gestures and soft words that she would return by nightfall. Wichapi watched her, her dark eyes betraying nothing but as Abigail prepared to leave the girl, pressed the small carved bird into her hand. It was a gesture of trust so profound it brought tears to Abigail's eyes. She gently closed Witch Harpy's fingers around the totem and pushed it back towards her neck. "You keep it safe, little one. I'll be back." She secured the cabin as best she could, hiding Witch Harpy in the small root cellar beneath the floorboards, a cramped, dark space, but the safest she could devise. The girl went without protest, her silence now feeling less like a mystery and more like a shield. The ride to Redemption Gulch was tense. Every shadow seemed to shift, every gust of wind carried imagined whispers. The settlement, when she reached it, was little more than a muddy track, flanked by a dozen rough-hewn buildings, a general store, a saloon, whose music already sounded tinny and forlorn in the midday sun, a blacksmith, and a few nameless shacks. Inside the general store, run by a dour man named Silas Blackwood, the air was thick with the smell of coffee, cured meats, and the low murmur of conversation. As Abigail made her purchases, flour, salt, coffee, and a precious few bullets for her old rifle, she listened intently. The talk, as Jedediah had hinted, was indeed focused on the Lakota. Mato Niyan, they call him, a grizzled prospector, was saying to a younger man with shifty eyes. "Says the spirits talk to him, says the buffalo will return, and the white man will vanish like smoke." "He's just a troublemaker," Silas interjected, weighing Abigail's flour, filling the young braves' heads with nonsense. "The army should have dealt with him long ago. They say he predicted the big snow," another voice chimed in, a nervous-looking fellow huddled by the stove. "And that his daughter, she carries some kind of power herself, a star woman, some call her." Abigail's blood ran cold. Star woman, Witch Harpy. Power, the shifty-eyed man scoffed, though he looked intrigued. "What kind of power? Gold good hunting grounds?" "More like a curse, if you ask me," Silas grumbled. "The sooner that whole family is rounded up, the better for all of us." He glanced sharply at Abigail. "You need anything else, Mrs. Fuller?" Abigail, struggling to keep her composure, shook her head, paid for her goods, and hurried out. The casual venom in their voices, the fear mixed with a predatory curiosity, terrified her. Witch Harpy wasn't just a missing child. She was a symbol, a target. As she packed her meager supplies onto her old mare, she remembered stories her father, a man who had briefly traded with the Lakota in his youth before settling down to a harsh farming life, used to tell. He'd spoken of the Paha Sapa, the Black Hills, with a kind of reverence. He'd told her they were the heart of the world, for the Lakota, a sacred place where spirits dwelled and visions were sought. He'd also spoken of the treaties solemnly made and callously broken when gold was discovered in those sacred hills. "They're a proud people, Abigail," he'd said, his voice tinged with a sadness she hadn't understood as a child. "And a wronged people, remember that." The memory struck her with the force of a physical blow. The Paha Sapa. Jedediah had mentioned Mato Niyan was stirring up trouble near the Paha Sapa. This wasn't just about a wandering prophet, it was tied to the deep wounds of a displaced people, their sacred lands desecrated. And Witch Harpy, the star woman, was somehow at the center of this simmering conflict. The ride back to the cabin was a blur of fear and resolve. The setting sun cast long, eerie shadows across the snow, and every coyote howl sounded like a hunting cry. When she finally reached the cabin, her heart was pounding. She called out softly as she unbarred the door. Silence. "Witch Harpy," she called again, her voice trembling. A small shuffling sound came from beneath the floorboards. Abigail rushed to the trap door, her hands fumbling with the latch. She threw it open, peering into the darkness. Two luminous eyes stared back at her. "It's me, child. I'm back," Abigail said, relief washing over her in a dizzying wave. Whichapi emerged slowly, covered in dust, but unharmed. She looked at Abigail, then at the provisions, and then her gaze settled on Abigail's face, searching. Abigail knelt and pulled the girl into a fierce hug. "Oh, thank God," she whispered, burying her face in the child's dark hair. For the first time since she'd found her, Whichapi didn't just endure the embrace. A small hand tentatively patted Abigail's back. Later that evening, as a new storm gathered outside, a smaller, less furious echo of the first Abigail sat watching the girl. The pieces Jedediah and the townsfolk had provided, combined with her father's memories of the Pahasapa, painted a stark and dangerous picture. Whichapi was not merely lost, she was likely fleeing, or had been separated from her people during a perilous journey. Her father, Mato Niyan, was not just a troublemaker, but a spiritual leader trying to guide his people, perhaps even to reclaim a fragment of their stolen heritage or protect what little they had left. And his daughter, this silent star woman, was intrinsically linked to his prophecies, his struggle. Abigail felt a profound sense of dread, but also a burgeoning anger. The casual cruelty of the men in the store, their eagerness to see a child rounded up, it sickened her. Her father's words echoed again. A wronged people. She looked at Whichapi, at the innocent face, the ancient eyes that had seen too much. This child wasn't a pawn, or a curse, or a bounty. She was a human being, terrified and alone. The moral dilemma Abigail faced was stark. To keep Whichapi was to invite unimaginable danger upon herself. The men in Redemption Gulch, the bounty hunters Jedediah had mentioned, even the army could come knocking. But to hand her over, to whom? To men who saw her as a commodity or a threat, the thought was unbearable. Her gaze fell upon the small, worn Bible Thomas had left behind. She wasn't a conventionally religious woman, the harshness of prairie life having stripped away most of her formal pieties. But she believed in right and wrong. She believed in protecting the innocent. The wind howled outside, and the cabin creaked and groaned. But inside, a quiet resolve settled in Abigail's heart. She had given shelter to this silent girl in the storm. She wouldn't abandon her now. Whatever came, they would face it together. The vast, indifferent prairie had thrown them together for a reason. Perhaps Abigail thought the Pahasapa weren't the only place where spirits moved and destinies were forged. Sometimes they were found in the quiet courage of a lonely woman and a silent child huddled together against the storm. The uneasy peace that followed Abigail's trip to Redemption Gulch was short-lived, shattered by the harsh reality they both feared. It was a cold, bright morning, the kind where the snow crunched loudly underfoot and breath plumed like smoke. Abigail was chopping firewood, the rhythmic thud of her axe, a familiar comfort, while Whichapi sat on the cabin step, carefully mending a small tear in her deerskin leggings with a needle and sinew Abigail had given her. The girl's silence was still profound, but there was a growing ease between them, a language of shared glances and small gestures. Suddenly, Whichapi stiffened her head, snapping up eyes fixed on the distant horizon. Abigail followed her gaze. For a moment, she saw nothing but the endless white. Then dark shapes emerged, resolving themselves into 3 riders, moving at a determined pace towards the homestead. They weren't casual visitors. Their posture was rigid, purposeful. Inside Whichapi quickly, Abigail hissed, her heart leaping into her throat. Under the floorboards, Whichapi didn't need telling twice. She scrambled into the cabin and disappeared into the root cellar like a frightened rabbit pulling the trapdoor almost shut behind her. Abigail grabbed her axe, its weight a meager reassurance, and stood her ground by the woodpile, her expression grim. The riders drew closer, their horses kicking up plumes of snow. The leader was a tall, rangy man, with a weathered face, a cruel slash of a mouth, and eyes like chips of ice. A long scar snaked down one cheek, disappearing into his greasy collar. He wore a dusty hat and a long coat that couldn't quite conceal the Colt peacemaker strapped to his hip. His companions were equally unsavory, their faces hard and predatory. Abigail recognized the type ex-soldiers, bounty hunters men who thrived on the misery of others. This was no friendly visit. "Well, well, what have we here?" the leader drawled, pulling his horse to a halt a few feet from Abigail. His gaze swept over her. Then, the cabin lingering on the faint wisps of smoke curling from the chimney. "A lonely woman in a lonely place. Name's Culpepper. These are my associates, Mr. Hicks and Mr. Lowry. This is private property," Abigail said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "State your business." Culpepper smirked, a humorless twisting of his lips. "Business is exactly what we're here for, ma'am. We're looking for someone. A little Injun girl. Small dark hair, silent as a shadow. Answers to the name Star Woman or something equally fanciful. Seen anyone like that?" His icy eyes pinned her. Abigail's mind raced. Deny it. But what if they searched? "I've seen no one," she said, her voice flat. "Just snow and coyotes for weeks." Hicks, a burly man with a perpetually sneering face, chuckled. "She's a feisty one, ain't she, Culpepper? Maybe we should have a look inside that cozy little cabin, just to be sure." "You'll do no such thing," Abigail retorted, gripping the axe handle tighter. "There's nothing in there for you." Culpepper's eyes narrowed. "We have reliable information that the girl passed this way after the big storm. We also know that the so-called prophet Mato Niyan is offering a substantial reward for her safe return. But others," he paused, letting his words hang in the air, "others are offering even more for her acquisition. She's quite the valuable little commodity." "Reward," Abigail echoed, feigning ignorance, though Jedediah's words about a bounty now took on a more sinister meaning. "Indeed," Culpepper said smoothly, "but we're not interested in returning her to her papai. Our employers have a more vested interest. You see, this Star Woman isn't just any child. They say she's the key. Mato Niyan's prophecies speak of a hidden sanctuary, a place of power, deep within the Pahasapa, a place where the Lakota believe their ancestors will return and grant them victory. And this girl, this silent little whelp, is said to be the only one who knows the way or how to unlock its secrets. She's not just a prophet's daughter, she's a map, a living, breathing Anpetuwi, a morning star to guide her people." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And we intend to make her guide us." Abigail felt sick. So this was it. Not just prejudice or petty greed, but a calculated plan to exploit the child, to desecrate something sacred to the Lakota, all for some imagined power or treasure. The Pahasapa, her father's words, it all clicked into a horrifying mosaic. "I told you," Abigail said, her voice hardening into cold fury. "There's no one here." Culpepper's smirk vanished. "We'll see about that." He nodded to Hicks and Lowry. "Search the place." As Hicks dismounted and started towards the cabin, Abigail swung the axe, not as a weapon, but as a warning, embedding its blade deep into the chopping block with a resounding thwack. "I said no." Hicks paused, surprised by her ferocity. Culpepper's hand drifted towards his gun. "Don't be foolish, woman. We don't want to hurt you, but we will have that girl." Suddenly, a flurry of movement erupted from the side of the cabin. A small, dark blur shot out from behind the woodpile where Abigail had stacked fresh logs. It was Whichapi. She hadn't stayed hidden in the cellar. Instead, she'd somehow slipped out, perhaps through a loose board Abigail hadn't noticed, and armed herself with a primitive but effective weapon, a short, sturdy branch, one end sharpened to a crude point. With a speed that belied her size, she darted towards Culpepper's horse, jabbing the pointed stick hard into its flank. The horse screamed and reared violently, nearly unseating the startled Culpepper. In the ensuing chaos, Whichapi didn't run towards the open prairie, as Abigail might have expected. Instead, she dove towards the lean-to, where Abigail kept her chickens, a small rickety structure. "The little devil," Lowry snarled, reaching for his own weapon. "Get her!" Culpepper roared, fighting to control his spooked mount. Hicks lunged for Whichapi, but Abigail, reacting on pure instinct, swung the axe handle, catching him hard across the shins. He yelped in pain and stumbled. Whichapi, meanwhile, had scrambled onto the low roof of the lean-to with the agility of a squirrel. From this slight elevation, she rained down a barrage of carefully hoarded stones and clods of frozen earth. She must have gathered her small face, a mask of fierce determination. Her aim was surprisingly accurate, pelting Hicks and Lowry, momentarily distracting them. Her silence remained unbroken, but her actions spoke volumes. Culpepper, regaining control of his horse, his face contorted with rage, drew his peacemaker. "Enough of this!" he bellowed, aiming not at Whichapi, but at Abigail. "You first, interfering bitch!" Time seemed to slow. Abigail saw the black hole of the barrel, the flash of Culpepper's cruel eyes. She braced herself for the impact. This was it. She had tried. Then something whistled through the air. An arrow, feathered and deadly, sprouted from Culpepper's gun arm. He screamed a high-pitched sound of shock and agony, and the peacemaker clattered uselessly into the snow. Abigail stared, stunned. Hicks and Lowry, equally surprised, spun around, guns drawn, searching for the unseen archer. Another arrow hissed past Lowry's ear, embedding itself in the cabin wall beside him with a vicious thud. From the sparse line of cottonwoods that marked the frozen creek bed, perhaps 50 yards away, emerged two figures on horseback. They were Lakota warriors, their faces grim bows knocked. And behind them, on a powerful paint pony, sat a man whose presence radiated an undeniable authority. He was older, his face deeply lined, his long, gray hair braided with eagle feathers. His eyes, dark and piercing, surveyed the scene with a hawk's intensity. Even before he spoke, Abigail knew. This was Mato Niyan. The prophet had come, and he had not come alone. The arrival of Mato Niyan and his warriors shifted the balance of power in an instant. Culpepper, clutching his bleeding arm, cursed vehemently, his face pale with pain and fury. Hicks and Lowry, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, looked uncertain, their bravado rapidly deflating. The arrows loosed with silent precision were a stark reminder of the skill and determination they faced. Whichapi, still perched on the lean-to roof, let out a small choked sound. The first Abigail had heard from her that wasn't a gasp of effort. Her eyes were fixed on Mato Niyan, a mixture of awe, relief, and perhaps a touch of fear, swirling within them. Mato Niyan rode forward slowly, his gaze sweeping over the scene. Culpepper and his men, Abigail, standing defiantly with her axe, and finally his daughter. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone and sorrow. He stopped his horse a short distance away, his warriors flanking him, their bows still aimed at the bounty hunters. "You bleed on land that does not welcome you." Mato Niyan said, his voice low and resonant, carrying easily in the crisp air. It was a voice accustomed to commanding attention, to speaking truths that resonated like thunder. He spoke in English clear and precise, with only a trace of an accent. "You hunt what is not yours to take." Culpepper, his initial shock wearing off, snarled, "She's a valuable asset, Prophet, and we aim to collect." Despite his injury, his greed still burned. Mato Niyan's eyes like embers fixed on Culpepper. "She is Wichapi Awangyanke, Wakingyang, the star who watches with the thunder. She is the daughter of my heart and a child of the people. She is not an asset." His gaze then shifted to Abigail, and for a long moment he simply looked at her, his eyes searching, probing. Abigail met his gaze steadily, her heart still hammering, but her fear now tempered by a strange sense of inevitability. "And you, Mato Niyan," said his voice, softening almost imperceptibly. "The woman who gave shelter when the storm spirits raged. My scouts watched. They saw you take her in. They saw you offer warmth when others would have offered only coldness or fear." Abigail didn't know what to say. She could only nod, acknowledging his words. "Why?" Mato Niyan asked a simple question that carried immense weight. "Why did you protect her, knowing the danger?" Before Abigail could answer, Culpepper, emboldened by what he perceived as a negotiation, interrupted. "Don't listen to him, woman. There's still a reward on her head. A big one. We can split it. Just help us take her. These savages will kill you as soon as look at you." One of Mato Niyan's warriors knocked another arrow, his movement a silent threat. Culpepper flinched. Abigail ignored him, her attention fixed on the Prophet. She was a child alone and freezing. Abigail said, her voice clear and strong, "No one deserves to be left to die in a storm, and no child deserves to be hunted." She paused, then added, her voice dropping slightly, "My father taught me of the Pahasapa of the Lakota. He taught me of respect and of wrongs done." A flicker of something unreadable passed through Mato Niyan's eyes. He looked at Wichapi, who had slowly, cautiously climbed down from the lean-to roof and was now standing near Abigail, her small hand instinctively reaching out to clutch a fold of Abigail's skirt. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes of the bond that had formed between them. Mato Niyan saw it. He saw the trust in his daughter's eyes as she looked at this white woman. He saw the weariness and the fierce protectiveness in Abigail's stance. "The path of my daughter has been a hard one," Mato Niyan said, his voice filled with a deep sadness. "When the soldiers came to our winter camp, scattering our people like leaves in the wind, she saw things no child should see. Her silence," he paused, his gaze resting on Wichapi. "Her silence is a shield against the horrors of vow she made to the spirits until a time of safety, a time of true sanctuary. It is a sacred silence, not easily broken." He continued, his voice taking on a more prophetic tone. "The spirits showed me a vision. A lone woman with a heart strong as the prairie oak, living in a small lodge of earth. They showed me my daughter finding refuge with her a tiny star, finding solace in an unexpected constellation. They showed me that this woman would be a key, not to a physical place, but to a bridge of understanding, if she had the courage to cross it." His gaze returned to Abigail, intense and searching. "The hunters you see," he gestured to Culpepper and his men, "are but shadows of a greater darkness that seeks to devour our sacred lands, our ways, our very spirit. They believe Wichapi can lead them to a physical place of power. They are fools. The true power lies not in a location, but in the spirit of the people, in the continuity of our traditions, in the hope carried by our children. He looked at Wichapi. It is time, little star. The spirits say your silence has served its purpose. There are those here who need to hear your voice, to understand the truth you carry. Wichapi looked from her father to Abigail, then down at the small carved bird she still clutched. Her lips trembled. Mato Niyan then presented Abigail with a desperate choice, though his words were calm. These men, he indicated Culpeper, will not stop. Others will follow. They will use Wichapi to try and unlock secrets that are not theirs, to desecrate what is holy. We are taking her to a hidden place, a sanctuary deep within the folds of the Pahasapa, where she can be safe, where our people are gathering. It is a perilous journey. He paused. You have shown great courage, Abigail Fuller, more than many of my own people might have shown to a stranger. I offer you a choice. You can remain here. We will ensure these men trouble you no more. Your life can return to what it was. His eyes held no judgment, only a weary understanding of the burden he was asking her to consider. Or, he continued, you can come with us. Wichapi, she has grown to trust you. Your presence would be a comfort to her on this hard road. And perhaps a faint, almost sad smile touched his lips. Perhaps your journey is now intertwined with ours. The spirits work in ways we do not always understand. Abigail looked at Wichapi. The child's dark eyes, usually so unreadable, were now wide with a silent plea. It wasn't a plea to be saved, Abigail realized, but a plea not to be separated again, not to lose this fragile connection they had forged. Culpeper, sensing his opportunity slipping away entirely, tried one last gamble. Don't be a fool, woman. They're leading you to your death. You'll be a prisoner, a slave. Abigail ignored his desperate ranting. Her decision, when it came, felt less like a choice and more like an acceptance of a path already laid out. She thought of her empty cabin, the lonely years stretching behind her, and the equally lonely years that might stretch ahead if she stayed. Then she looked at Wichapi's small, upturned face, at the trust shining in her eyes. The Pahasapa, her father's stories, the whispers of the prairie, it all converged into this single, defining moment. I will go with you, Abigail said, her voice quiet but firm. I will go with Wichapi. A profound silence fell, broken only by Culpeper's muttered curses. Mato Niyan nodded slowly, a look of deep respect in his eyes. So be it, he said. The spirits have spoken, and you have listened. He turned to his warriors. Secure these Shiindidi scavengers. Take their weapons and their horses. They will walk back to whatever hole they crawled from. Let them carry a message: the Lakota protect their own, and those who stand with them. The journey to the Pahasapa was arduous. Mato Niyan led them on winding hidden trails through snow-choked canyons and across windswept plateaus, avoiding settlements and known cavalry patrols. Abigail, mounted on a sturdy pony provided by the Lakota, rode beside Wichapi. The child, though still silent, seemed to draw strength from Abigail's presence, often reaching out to briefly touch her hand, a small reassurance in the vast, intimidating landscape. Mato Niyan spoke little to Abigail directly during the first days of travel, his attention focused on their safety and progress. But in the evenings, around a carefully concealed fire, he would sometimes share stories of his people, their connection to the land, and the prophecies that guided him. He spoke of the Pahasapa not as a fortress or a treasure trove, as Culpeper had imagined, but as a spiritual sanctuary, a place for healing and renewal, where the Lakota hoped to preserve their way of life against the encroaching tide. Abigail listened, learning more about the Lakota worldview than she ever had from settlers' tales or dry government reports. She saw the deep love Mato Niyan had for his daughter and his people, the heavy burden of leadership he carried. She saw the quiet dignity of his warriors, their resilience, and their unwavering loyalty. One evening, as they camped near a frozen waterfall that glittered like diamonds in the moonlight, Wichapi, who had been staring intently into the flames, turned to Abigail. She reached into a small pouch at her waist and pulled out a piece of charcoal and a smooth, flat piece of bark. Carefully, she began to draw. She drew the cabin, the storm, and Abigail standing by the fire. Then she drew herself small and lost, and Abigail reaching out a hand. Finally, she drew Mato Niyan, and then herself, standing between her father and Abigail, all three holding hands. It was a child's drawing, simple and direct, yet it conveyed a powerful message of connection and gratitude. Abigail felt a lump in her throat. "It's beautiful, Wichapi," she whispered. As they drew nearer to the Paha Sapa, the air grew colder, the landscape more rugged and imposing. Scouts reported increased army patrols in the foothills, and the tension within their small group mounted. Mato Niyan explained that Culpeper and his men, though disarmed, would have undoubtedly reported their encounter and the location of their general heading. One afternoon, as they navigated a narrow pass, the trap was sprung. Blue-coated cavalry soldiers appeared suddenly at both ends of the pass, blocking their escape. They were led by a stern-faced captain with cold eyes, the kind of man who saw the world in black and white orders and enemies. With him looking smug and vengeful despite a bandaged arm was Culpeper. "Mato Niyan," the captain called out. "You are surrounded. Lay down your arms. We have orders to bring you and the girl in. Resistance is futile." Culpeper smirked from behind the captain. "Told you we'd find you, prophet, and the woman too, harboring a fugitive aiding savages. You'll hang for this." Mato Niyan's warriors tensed, arrows ready, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The situation looked hopeless. Abigail's heart sank. This was it. They had come so far, only to be caught like animals in a trap. She looked at Wichapi. The child's face was pale, her eyes wide with the familiar terror Abigail had seen when she first found her. But this time, there was something else there too. A flicker of defiance, a spark of the spirit her father so often spoke of. Mato Niyan raised a hand, signaling his warriors to hold their fire. He looked at the captain, his expression sorrowful but resolute. "We seek no conflict, Captain. We seek only to live in peace on the land the Great Spirit gave us. Your peace involves theft and inciting rebellion, prophet," the captain retorted. "The girl comes with us. She's a ward of the territorial government now. She is a child of the Lakota nation." Mato Niyan's voice boomed, echoing off the canyon walls. "She is not a pawn in your games." It was then, in that moment of desperate confrontation, with guns aimed and futures hanging in the balance, that Wichapi stepped forward. She moved past her father, past Abigail, until she stood in the open, facing the soldiers, facing Culpeper. Her small figure seemed incredibly vulnerable against the backdrop of armed men and towering rock. She took a deep breath, her small chest rising. The silence of the canyon seemed to deepen, every man present holding his breath. Even the wind seemed to pause its mournful song. And then Wichapi spoke. Her voice, when it came, was not the tentative whisper of a frightened child. It was clear, surprisingly strong, and resonant like a perfectly tuned bell. It cut through the tense silence with an almost physical force. She spoke first in Lakota, a torrent of words that flowed with an eloquence that belied her years, her small hands gesturing with conviction. Mato Niyan's warriors listened with rapt attention, their expressions shifting from grim resolve to awe, then to a fierce pride. Even Mato Niyan himself seemed taken aback by the power and clarity of her speech. Then she turned her gaze directly to the captain, and her voice, though still carrying its bell-like clarity, shifted to English learned, perhaps from her father, or from observation, or from a place deeper still. "I am Wichapi Owangyanka Wakingyang," she declared, her chin held high. "I am not a key to your greed. I am not a map to a treasure you imagine. The Pahasapa you seek to plunder is not just rock and dirt. It is the heart of my people. It bleeds just as my people bleed from your broken promises and your bullets." She pointed a small accusatory finger at Culpepper. "This man," she said, her voice ringing with cold fury, "he and his kind, they do not seek justice. They followed me through the great storm. They would have left me to freeze if it meant they could capture my father. They hurt my people. They speak with twisted tongues and carry evil in their hearts. He does not want to protect me. He wants to use me to find the sacred places so he can defile them, just as his kind has defiled our lands and our lives." Her words, simple yet profound, hung in the air. The soldiers, many of them young men, simply following orders, looked uneasy. The captain's stern expression wavered for a moment. Culpepper spluttered, "She's lying. The little savage is a born liar, just like her father." But Wichapi's gaze did not falter. She looked at the captain. "My father, Mato Niyan, speaks of peace, but he also speaks of justice. He teaches us to honor the Great Spirit, to protect our Mother Earth, and to remember who we are. Is that so wrong? Is that what you hunt us for?" She then turned to Abigail, and her voice for the first time softened, filled with an undeniable affection. "This woman," she said, her dark eyes shining, "Abigail Fuller. She found me when I was lost in the snow, when my spirit was almost gone. She shared her fire, her food, her heart. She did not ask my name or my tribe. She saw only a child in need. She is not a savage lover or a traitor. She is Iyushkinya Ng, a woman of great heart. She shows what is possible when fear does not rule." The breaking of Wichapi's silence was more powerful than any weapon. Her words, filled with truth and a wisdom far beyond her years, seemed to stun the soldiers into inaction. The captain looked from the small, eloquent girl to the furious Culpepper, then to the stoic Mato Niyan, and finally to Abigail, whose face was wet with silent tears. The captain was a soldier, bound by duty, but he was also a man. Wichapi's words, her undeniable innocence, juxtaposed with her fierce conviction, had struck a chord deeper than orders could easily erase. He looked at Culpepper, whose face was a mask of sweaty frustration and rage, his earlier smugness completely gone. He looked at his own men, their expressions now uncertain, some even showing flickers of sympathy. The clear moral line he thought he was upholding had become blurred, complicated by the undeniable humanity of those he was sent to apprehend. "My orders are to bring in Mato Niyan and the girl," the captain finally said, his voice heavy, but the earlier steel had softened. However, he paused, his gaze lingering on Wichapi, then on Abigail. "There are always ways orders can be interpreted in light of new information." He turned to Culpepper. "Your accusations, Mr. Culpepper, seem increasingly self-serving. And your methods? Questionable. Questionable, Culpeper shrieked. She's a child of a wanted hostile. This woman is consorting with them. They should all be clapped in irons. Silence, the captain snapped, his patience clearly gone. He addressed Mato Niyan. The Paha Sapa are a tinderbox prophet. Your presence here, your gatherings, they make my superiors nervous. There are powerful men who want this land, who want what they believe is hidden within it. They will not stop. We know this, Mato Niyan replied calmly. We do not seek war. We seek only a place to live as our ancestors did, to pray to Wakantanka in peace. The captain sighed a sound of profound weariness. He made a decision. I will report that we encountered you. I will report that the girl Wichapi is unharmed and clearly under the protection of her father. I will also report, he gave Culpeper a look of utter disdain, that the civilian tracker, Culpeper, endangered the mission with his recklessness and unsubstantiated claims beyond simple tracking. He will be escorted back to Fort Meade and his contract reviewed. Culpeper's jaw dropped. You can't. I can and I will, Mr. Culpeper, the captain stated firmly. He then looked at Mato Niyan. Take your daughter, take your people, and go deep into these hills where my patrols are less likely to stumble upon you. Disappear, prophet. For your sake, and for the sake of peace, however fragile it may be. But know this, if there are further reports of unrest of raids or threats linked to you, my orders will be unequivocal next time. Mato Niyan inclined his head. You show wisdom, Captain, and for that we are grateful. We will go. We will seek the quiet places. The soldiers, under the captain's command, lowered their weapons. Two of them, looking none too gentle, took Culpeper by the arms, ignoring his protests, and began to lead him away. The tension in the pass slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a fragile, unspoken truce. And so the prairie kept its secrets, but also bore witness to an unbreakable bond, forged in storm and fire. Abigail and Wichapi, two souls from different worlds, showed that courage and compassion could echo louder than the thunder of cannons or the howl of prejudice. Their story reminds us that even in the harshest landscapes, amidst the deepest conflicts, understanding can bloom in the most unexpected of hearts. What choices would you have made in Abigail's worn-out boots? What does Wichapi's eventual voice, breaking her profound silence, signify to you about the power of truth and the courage to speak it? If this tale of the untamed West of hidden destinies and unexpected courage stirred your spirit, then help us share more stories like it. Hit that like button to show your support, share this video with fellow adventurers and history lovers, and be sure to subscribe for more journeys into the heart of the past. Don't forget to let us know in the comments below what part of Abigail and Wichapi's story resonated most with you, or what lessons you'll take away. Until next time, keep searching for the extraordinary in the unexpected, and may you always find the courage to offer shelter from the storm.